Welcome everybody to VegasPy. I'm Adam Englander, and I'm once again the guy running it. The other two that had it for so long, a big round of applause for the guys that ran it. And it's a hard thing to do, right? It's a very hard thing to do, and they still help me out, and we're all doing wonderful stuff. But it's great to see old friends. So I guess we'll quickly jump in today to our presentation, which means I need to pop out of here and go to my other presentation. So we had requests last week. Or actually, I think I suggested somebody said it was a good idea. Where is it going? Sorry. Couldn't figure out where the screens were. On context managers. So managing Python context managers. Basically, it's kind of efficient resource management made easy. So for some people, we may not know what a context manager is, right? So it's an object that defines a runtime context and set up and tear down. You've probably used them, but you can see why you may have used them before and why they might be useful. So the use cases are for ensuring resources are properly cleaned up. So if you need to connect and disconnect from something, if you need to open a file, close a file, if you need to lock a thread, unlock a thread, it makes sure there's a lot of stuff. You can do this without context managers, but it takes a lot more code and you have to constantly repeat it. So it's it's also kind of don't repeat yourself for encapsulation of code for like timers and loggers and counters. If you've ever used any of like the application process management stuff like New Relic or what's the one I use? Datadog, right? To track what's going on in your code, you're probably creating spans, and those spans are context managers. So a context manager, you know that you're using it because you're using the with statement. All right, so if you've written Python and you've used the with statement, you have a with expression as var and a block. As var is not required. That's optional, but most of the time you want to use the thing, but sometimes you're just timing something and you don't care. You just need to wrap something. The expression must return a context manager, right? So it is a function that returns a context manager. And a context manager has a function called enter and a function called exit. They're dunder functions. That enter gets called before it enters the block. Exit gets called after it leaves the block. That's really all it is. Why you would use it? So automatic cleanup. So if you have something where it's like, oh, well, every time I do a database request, I need to try and do it, and if it succeeded, commit. If it failed, roll back, right? And you just find yourself writing that over and over and over and over again. Well, I guess probably used to, right? Postgres now just has the with transaction, right? So it has its own context manager to kind of do all that for you. That if I get an exception, you can do that. And you can also have it deal with the types of exceptions, right? It's readable. It makes it you don't have to look at a bunch of try catch blocks, try except blocks that are just constantly repeated, indenting your code and making it look more confusing and adding more layers and levels. And it's safe, so it guarantees that if you use this, it's going to be able to handle teardowns and exceptions and make sure it tears down on exceptions, right? Because some folks don't realize that, well, there's a thing called the finally block that makes sure that always happens. So sometimes you want to do stuff in there. So a built-in example, right? You've probably used this. If you open up files in Python, you may have done the top part, which is open a file and then read the file and then close the file. You do it in a try and then a finally to make sure you actually close it, because if it throws an exception, it would not hit the close. Or you can just do a with, right? Because open returns a context manager. And it will open the file and it will close the file automatically once it gets done, right? So you've probably used context managers before because they're really just super helpful. Any questions so far? I don't want to roll through this too quick. All right. So the anatomy of a context manager. So a context manager is just any object that has two dunder functions, If you're unfamiliar with Python, dunder means double underscore on both sides. So dunder functions for enter, and enter takes no parameters, and exit takes a bunch of exception data. So you'll know that it exited as an exception, and then it'll give you the type of the exception, the value of the exception, and the traceback. So you can then determine like, oh, well, what do I want to do based on this exception for the exit? It'd be similar if you did like a try, except finally. Again, any error in the block triggers the exit. So the exit always gets to the second it leaves the block, whether it's an exception or not. Questions about that?
And just one thing. If an exception comes from the outside, externally.
Of the block?
Externally from the program. But here's how that can happen. Let's say on Unix, Linux, DOS, whatever.
Right.
With a control C.
Right. So that triggers an event, which is a key interrupt exception.
Okay. Oh, okay. So it does do it on that sort of.
Yeah. I've written some CLIs where you have to be able to capture it and wait for it to finish and finish pausing out. So there's actually a keyword interrupt exception.
Right.
And so when you hit, depending on so there's a keyword interrupt exception. If you want to get really into it, you can actually just make signal handlers.
Right.
That when I get this signal, I do this. When I get that signal, call this function. When I go this signal, call that function. So there's a lot of you can register signal handlers to handle all that stuff for external. But if you're executing a process, right, you would get the error back in the process manager, or if it's another thread, it would still process properly.
So then this does take care of that.
Well, if you're maybe, right? Because again, like there's a keyword interrupt error, which means you just did a keyboard interrupt. If you got a kill 9, right? So if you did in a Linux, if you did a kill 9 on your process, that is different from a keyboard interrupt. And unless you wrote a signal handler to handle it, it wouldn't handle it because it doesn't want you to. Like kill 9 is like stop, don't do anything, just stop. Now you can tell kill 9 to go to hell, right? And you can just be like, oh, I want to catch whatever that signal is for kill 9. And then I want to do something based on it because I don't ever want to just stop.
Well, there's a signal called stop, so I'm going to say stop.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, there's signaling is a whole thing inside of Python that you can register handlers for.
I've done that. I just didn't know whether or not
the standard control C.
Control C is a little different, I guess. But there are different levels of killing sending the signal.
Right. Yeah, there are different signals that can be sent. Pause signal and. Yeah. There's a whole section. If somebody really wanted to talk about signals, we could get into signals for like an entire presentation. But I had to write it for something that's basically like I'm processing the blockchain, and I have to process things in order, so I can't stop in the middle. I have to actually finish or roll back everything I had before. So if I couldn't just die on a kill 9. Right, and what ends up happening is like if you're in a Docker container, if it doesn't shut down when it wants it to, doesn't meet the time, it's then going to do a kill 9, right? And so I'm like, I still don't want to just return. I want to make sure I finish handling this. I don't want Docker to tell me that you have to stop. I've got to clean this up. And if it destroys my whole system, that's fine, because the whole idea of the system is I haven't finished processing this block yet, and I can't double process a block because it's transactional and it's a whole thing. So I hope that answered your question.
Almost.
So what part is unclear?
Well, okay, I'm going to have to take a look into how Unix or Linux or one of those handles it, because I suspect there is a signal that says, just go away. I'm not even going to signal the process. I'm going to kill it right now. You're out of here.
I'm not sure, but it still sends the signal to the program. It still sends the signal to the program.
It always does. Okay.
To my understanding, I'm no super like Linux genius, but
okay. Well, it doesn't. Yeah. So
you know when it doesn't send a signal to a program? It's when you just pull it over.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But,
So
this lets you.
So you could, in theory, if you wanted to always if you wanted to build something inside of a context manager that always handled it, you could register signal handlers that would throw an exception that you would then process, right? Because then that would come back because that's still inside the block.
I got you.
So yeah, you can catch anything, but like whether an exception gets thrown or not is really outside of context managers, right? But if an exception is thrown and it is inside the block, Python will call the exit function
Okay.
of the context manager surrounding the block. That's a really good question. So again, handling exceptions, right? So you're getting the type, and based on the type, you can do whatever you want to do, right? So sometimes you may want to be like, oh, I want to roll back, or oh, this is like, so let's say you're doing HTTP, like something I have to handle all the time. Let's say you're writing a retry function, right? And I get a 429 back. Oh, well, okay, well, I want to handle that very differently. I want to look at, I get a HTTP exception, and my code is 429, which means that too many requests, so now I need to find out, did they give me in the response header, did they tell me when to retry, and then I'll wait for that long, and then try it again, and so there's a, it allows you to just kind of take all of that kind of craziness that you may want to use all over the place and encapsulate it. Now, I wouldn't build my own retry function because there are like a whole bunch of libraries that do that and do it really well. But that's the one thing I can think of where I do that all the time, where I have to just look inside of the exception, and then if it's a 429, retry. If it's a 500, do one thing, because that's not my fault. I might retry it again, right? Because they're throwing an error. So if I try it again, it might actually be fine. If I get a 404, I want to react to that differently than maybe just a standard 400. Like 400 means I did something wrong. 404 means they moved something. 429 means I'm doing too much, and a 500 means something went wrong on their side. So I tend to handle those errors very differently. And so this one basically has a thing where it's going to raise a value error, and if the exception type, so it's saying if I have an exception, print suppress, return true. So that's another thing, is that by default, if it's not truthy, right? That's one of the things you have to learn about in Python, what truthy means. Truthy means true, one, a string with a value. That's truthy. If you return something truthy, it will not re-raise the exception. If you return something that is not truthy, which is by default, if you don't return anything, it returns none, which is falsy. Or you return false or 0 or whatever, right? Most people just, if you don't do anything, it will re-raise the exception. So you're going to handle it. You can maybe log it, or the example I've got, right, is you're going to like, oh, I'm going to hit an error stat. And then I'm going to just let it keep raising because I want to hit the error stat that happened here, and I might want to have somewhere else where it fails somewhere else. So this is one way to process an error and do whatever you want to do, recover from it somehow, and then just keep continuing on in your application. Any questions? I'm talking fast, I can tell. So there are some super nice helper functions. If you don't require setup and teardown, you can just decorate your function with context manager, and it will automatically handle the enter and the exit. And it will basically, it's going to surround your, instead of having separate functions to do it, you're just going to have a yield statement. So if you've done PyTest before, it's like when you make I just totally lost it. I still can't even think about it. But yeah, it allows you to just do the front part, so it's going to go in and it's going to do the FSP, so you're going to yield back. And then you're going to process the stuff after the block, after the yield. So it's a nice, instead of just writing two functions for no particular reason, especially if you want to have a resource that you manage inside of there, you don't have to create a class instance where you're holding on to it and doing all this kind of nonsense, right? So you can just do it top down using a generator. One thing to remember though is this, that because of this, it only will yield once. And so if you try and use this twice, it will error. Because there is no more yield. It'll throw you, it's some iterator error, I can't remember what it is, but it'll give you an iteration error saying that there are no more items to iterate.
Iterator stop.
There you go. Yeah, something like that.
I've gotten it.
Yeah.
Question. Someone new to Python?
Yeah.
Very new to Python. So the context is the library. And then, so for the context manager, what's the right term for that thing?
That's a decorator. That was actually, did you record last month? Where'd he go? Is he gone? I think we did decorators last month.
Okay.
So it should be online if you want to watch that about decorators. There's also a lot of stuff about decorators all over the place. But there's a presentation from last month on the Tech Alley stuff for decorators.
Cool. Thank you.
But yeah, so like if you've seen Java before, right? You've seen that type of thing, and it's different, although similar. And I think TypeScript has it now too, annotations. But I do some TypeScript, but I don't do it enough to remember if that's true or not. But yeah, basically it's creating a wrapper around the function. So if you're familiar with kind of like standard kind of Gang of 4 design patterns, right? It's an actual decorator. It's just a really weird way to do it. That encapsulates just the function instead of like normally you would create for functional programming. So instead of creating an interface and then having something extend the interface and then injecting yours into the object, like if you're doing PHP or Java, or I think you still have to do it in C#. That's one way to do it. Or in Python, you can just put that on there and it will interact in a way that says, okay, I'm going to wrap this around here, and I can do stuff before it and do stuff after.
I also have a question about the thing where it returns a value once and then it throws an error the second time.
Yeah.
Does that work only when the function is a loop, or does the context manager have some sort of memory that keeps count of when error?
No. Well, it's basically what in Python, or no, it is there. I'm sorry. In Python, anything that yields is a generator.
Okay.
Right. So it's a generator, and there's no loop. So the next time you call this generator, right? So if you try to iterate over the generator, you call next, use the next function on it. It will error because there is no next.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see.
Yeah, because if you want to do create a generator that's going to do something, like I do this all the time with when I'm using AWS SDK, right? It's like, oh, you'll get 10 and you'll get the token for the next one, right? But that's really, I don't want to have my code always do that. So I'm just like, oh, so now I've got this generator that will yield through, it'll loop through and yield the next one on the list. It comes back and then go, oh, I've got to the bottom. Okay. Now I'm going to make the next call, and so on that yield, it'll make the next call, get the next value, and then return it.
Okay.
So the yield is used to just return multiple values without having to create an iterator. So it's like Fibonacci functions, stuff that are going to be memory intensive to remember what all of the previous values were, things like that. It's super popular for that because you can keep the state inside, and you can just keep moving through it. But this one, right, the way that you do this inside of a context manager, there is no next yield. So it would then tell you that you don't have another one and throw an error.
So that's built into the yield keyword. You don't need a class for it. You don't need
Correct.
a generator class for it.
Yeah, but the fact that it has yield in it means that this is a generator function.
Oh, wow. Okay, so yield means a whole lot more.
Yeah.
Okay. That's crazy.
Yeah, that defines it as a generator function. That means it's awaitable, right?
It's what is it?
It's awaitable.
Awaitable. Oh, I see.
Are you sure about that?
You can await yielded functions.
Is that true?
So if you set something...
Did I just say something wrong?
value-
I'm not sure that's
I
true.
thought to await something it needed a dot underscore await with a special method.
I'm not 100% sure on that one. I think if you make it you can make an async generator, which is awaitable. Well, so you'd have to make an async def and await, and then it could be an async awaitable.
Okay.
Right.
My bad. You're right. I was thinking about it. There was a really funky way to do it in like Python pre 3.6.
Yeah, they changed
Yeah, and I'm still remembering like the pre 3.6 nonsense that everybody hated. Nobody moved to Python until 3.6. Everybody moved to 3 after 3.6 went up because they stopped making it weird, or at least they did async stuff after 3.6. They kind of like figured out how they wanted to do it. Any more questions about the context loop helper? Yeah, I mean, I was trying to figure out. I have an example of how I do things for something, and I was trying to create the example really quick because I didn't have an example code. And actually, using the context manager decorator, just like, oh, it solved all my problems. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. I'll show you in a little bit here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the context manager needs to return basically an object of that context manager. Is that
So it needs to return an object that has the enter and exit.
okay? So in this case, the yield is that my resource.
The context manager just handles all that for you. You just have to have a function that yields.
Okay.
And the yield yields to the block.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't matter what you're yielding. It's just
Yeah,
okay.
it's just going to yield to the block.
And then back in the class representation, you just need to, when you instantiate the context manager with the with clause, then it's handling. So because you have the parentheses on it, then it's actually just returning that as a presser class. Is that-
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so you're instantiating it, so now it's an object that has an enter and an exit.
All right.
Right.
Oh, right. So then the enter returns.
Right. This requires you to make a class where, like, you're not doing anything at enter, right? You're just catching something at exit. So it's a whole lot easier just to do it like that.
Okay.
Right? It's a lot easier to read. It's a lot easier to understand. But you would still be able to, because it's a context manager, you could still actually just call enter and exit. Where'd I go? You could still call dunder enter or dunder exit, and it would be perfectly happy.
Okay. Dunder enter always has to return itself, essentially.
Dunder enter has to return, so dunder enter has to return the
Thing with the X.
the context manager, right? So you could have it return something else,
Right.
right? That is a context manager, but it has to,
Oh, boy.
yeah. Yeah, so that can get really complicated, but
Oh, my God.
yeah, it just has to return a context manager, and most of the time it's itself. Sometimes it's not, right? Because I think in my example it will. Well, actually, in my example, I was creating another class and returning that to maintain state for that particular context manager instance. But that became overly complicated, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work in 20 minutes. So I just changed it to a function that used a context manager, and it was perfectly fine. Because there's a class inside of a class, and how do you reference this? It's almost like the JavaScript. How do you reference this? Depending on where you are. And it's the same problem in Python. Like, what is this? Well, it's like, oh, this doesn't have this thing. Oh, look, that's up top. Okay. So I tried to do the cheat of like, this underscore equals this, or this equals self, right? And then, but that didn't work either, and I was like, I don't have time, I have to give this presentation tomorrow. So I was able to fix it with just decorating it with a context manager. Hopefully that made sense to some other people, because I know I'm talking really fast today. I apologize. I could look here, I need to look up there. Right, so a timing block, right? So we can create, using the context manager function, we create this timer function, you give it a name, and it will start the time, it will yield, it executes the block, it finishes the block, it runs end time, although as you know, it won't, if he throws an exception, it won't time it, looking at this one. But it's just kind of a general idea that if you throw it in there and you tell it to sleep 1, it'll just say it ran for 1 second, right? This is something that's super popular, and like if you're familiar with statsd, the Python statsd client provides basically the same thing here, right? Is I'm going to have a stat, and then I'm going to surround this block, and it will hit a stat. It'll time it. It'll do whatever it needs to do around that block of code. So
You're saying if time sleep through an exception, which it can,
for this one, yeah, it won't actually capture it and time it.
you would still get the time.
You would not.
You would not.
No, because you don't have anything that's going to catch the exception, right? So if you go back here, right, you need the try finally. It would need to have a try finally to actually time the error.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But instead of everywhere putting in, I want to time these things, start, run my code, right, trying to figure out how to do that, context managers make it super easy. So if it was going to be like the other stuff, right, you would just have it, you do a try, yield, finally, end the timer, and then print it, right? Hopefully that makes more sense. But yeah, like you can't, in the context manager decorator, you have to do the try except, because it's not going to always call the exit function. It's just inside of here. It's turning it into a generator and treating it like a generator. Because, again, you don't have an underscore. You wouldn't know what the exception was. And it would rethrow it.
How big is the code for context management?
For that, I've never looked at it. It's in pseudo C.
Oh, it's in C?
Yeah. It's a C Python library. So, yeah, it's in. I haven't actually taken a look. I've only spent time looking at the PHP code because I was looking at becoming a core contributor for PHP a while back, and that's all like this weird templated C stuff. It's not really C. It's like learning C isn't super helpful. You have to learn how their template system uses C. Or the macros, sorry, not templates, macros. So I'm not sure how Python does it. I looked at it at one point and I was like, I don't care enough. In the PHP world, they had a very small number of like core contributors. In Python, there are hundreds. Right? It's a gigantic like standard library. It has so much to it. Like there's so much you can do without having to add anything. It's not installing anything separately. And so yeah, there are just people who have different sections of it and there are, but I think there's at least 5 full-time paid people, and then there's like 100 people in general that just do just manage the core.
It's in Python.
It's in Python?
Context managers in Python.
That doesn't make any sense. But okay. I believe you.
Contextlib.py.
Contextlib.ui.
You sure it's not just a wrapper around the CPython?
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Huh.
Okay.
Weird. Okay. So that was an assumption I made because it's an internal library. I assumed that it was C. So you can actually go look and see what it does.
Oh, and most of the internal libraries are Python at this point. Only things that have to be faster.
Okay. So here's an advanced real-world example. I will go through pieces of it because that's too hard to read. So I created a statsd recorder, and this is what I was talking about, is that when you're using a context manager, you have to pass it. If you're not going to hold state, the standard way to do it, if you just use like the context manager function, is you're going to have to, if I wanted to use the statsd client, I'm going to have to pass it to the statsd client all the time. Or I can just create an object that has a call function, so I can instantiate my object. It's going to hold the state of what rate do I want to do it. If you're familiar with statsd, you don't want to send, unless you have very low volume, you don't want to send everything there. You want to randomly sample so that you don't destroy your server and use up all of the network sending UDP packets to statsd. So you'll do sampling. And so you can put the rate and the client there, and then you can just time things and wrap things. And I've actually done this with stuff before because I want, like, for every block, I want to say this ran, and I also want it to say when it errored, so I can get my percentage of error, and I always want it to time it. So I haven't seen this code in probably 3 years, so I had to try and recreate it, and it wasn't super easy in my head. But basically, it goes through, and so it stores the state, and then one of the methods of the object is call, which is a context manager. So you can then use that context manager and pass the metric name. And then it will start your timer using another context manager. It'll try and yield to whatever block it has. If there's exception, it'll increment the error. And at the end, it always increments just the standard counter. So it's doing a timer because that's all around. Although, in theory, I probably should have put the yield after or I should have put the context manager for the statsd client around yield instead of the try except. But yeah, maybe not, because it's adding time, but who cares? So this allows me to create multiple context managers that use the same stuff, right? Because I always want my rate of capture to be the same, and I always want to use the same statsd client because I don't have to recreate all the time or just always pass it in, and no one should have to know that that's what they're using. So if you have another one that doesn't use a statsd client, right, you want to be able to build the same thing that uses maybe arbitrary stats out to Datadog or whatever, right? You could, in theory, build yourself some abstraction there if you wanted to.
So if you call stats D recorder with the parentheses, it just works as a function?
Instantiate, it calls the init.
Oh, it calls the init?
Yeah.
So then how do you call it multiple times?
Because what it returns is the stats_d recorder object is itself a function. It's callable. So in Python, dunder call means that any object can be a function, can act like a function. It's callable. And so when you initialize stats_d recorder, and I think it's here, yeah. So you initialize the stats_d recorder. It's got stats_d. I didn't give it the timer. It's still getting 1. All right. And then with stats_d recorder sample task, right? So I've instantiated it. Can I do this?
Oh,
No.
okay. Okay, I see.
Right.
So stats_d recorder with the capital S, that runs init, and then stats_d recorder with the lowercase s just runs call.
Is an object, and then it runs call when you call stats_d recorder,
I see.
right? So that's the call, and the call takes the metric name.
Okay, yeah, and then init just returns itself.
Yeah, and it just
Right.
returns itself, which is callable.
I see.
And the callable is a context manager. It's decorated as a context manager, so it can just do its little thing with the yield statement and be super simple. I tried to return like a separate context manager class because that's how I did it last time when I built something like this. And I couldn't figure out how to get it right and remember how to do it. And I was like, oh, that's just dumb. I could just put the call in a context manager. It should work just fine.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. For a newbie.
Yeah.
How do you, again, there's the stacks, and D client, underscore client, there's
Right.
all these like same kind of close names. How do you like manage that as you're writing this out? Like what's your thought process with this? Is it just a lot of trial and error, copy and paste?
Naming things is hard, right? That doesn't matter what language you're in. Naming things is hard so that everybody knows what you mean and it doesn't get confusing, right? This was just me making something, and like I wrote this whole presentation in like 2 hours last night. So I didn't really put a whole lot of attention. If I was writing code, I would probably put a lot more attention into what the names were. And we might talk about it. Like I might have a talk to the other engineers of like you're saying, like, these names seem too similar. What should we call this thing? Like, how do we make sure that everybody understands what it is?
So I guess what I mean is like, okay, so I'm a analytics engineer, so I
Okay.
mainly work with SQL. So sometimes a lot of times we have
Yep.
a lot of big files, some smaller. But as
So
I'm
Postgres? I mean, it's not Postgres.
yeah, just like we use BigQuery,
Okay.
DBT.
All right.
But as I'm getting into this world, I started a project using AI for work, right? And it
Right,
gave
right.
like 400 lines, and it worked great. A lot of tinkering.
Right.
But as I was looking at it, I was going backwards and trying to like learn myself through. I was like, dude, how does someone remember the thing that they put way at the top and then put it down at the bottom? So that's kind of like what my question is. It's kind of vague.
Yeah. Well, like some of that is that some of it's experience, but what you're talking about is that the code is unreadable. It's not easily readable. All right. So what you get into people, there are whole like almost religions about how code should be so it is readable. Right? There are people that I know that would say that the first problem with that code is it doesn't break out every 10 lines into its own function. Right? Like your brain can't wrap that 100 lines very well. You can't hold that context very well. AI does it just fine. Your brain not so much. So you break out functionality chunks into their own functions so that you can just read like, oh, it's doing this within the function's named in a way that's easily understood what it's doing, and that you would like you could read the function and think that it was doing what it was actually doing. And say, oh, it does this, and it does this, and it does this, and it does that. So now you've got, instead of 100 lines, you've got 10 lines that make a lot of sense, and you don't have like indent, right? There are also people who say you should never go more than 2 lines deep, or 2 indentions deep. Because at that point, now you can't remember what's up, what's down, like what level is this at, and so there are ways to make code more readable.
Yeah.
And that's like a whole thing unto itself. What I found with most AI is it doesn't do that because it can understand the whole context. It doesn't make a difference to it if it's separated or not.
Right.
All right, so it's just, yep, well, that makes perfect sense to me, and it works.
Yeah.
But it's not just AI that does that, right? I was actually had a discussion with one of my engineers today, and we were talking about this thing, and like, we're worried about some stuff that we're building that's not like easily understandable. Where you have to like have a handover of like, tell me what you built so I understand what you did, which is somewhat problematic.
Right.
Because I was like, yeah, I was looking at this thing that he wrote. It works fantastically and it's great. It does all this stuff, but I looked at it and I couldn't figure out what it did. Right? Like I know the guy who wrote it, and like if I spent the time to like corral what he did and maybe go through the README a little more, it would probably make sense to me. But it's not a problem with new developers. It's a problem altogether. Is it's very hard to write easily readable code. Yeah.
If I may, the more you look at code, the more you see certain patterns over and over again, and after a while, your brain can encapsulate those patterns. So when you look at a huge chunk of code, you'll see, oh, there's that pattern, and you can very quickly deduce what's happening.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, with experience, you don't have to read every single line every single time.
Right.
It's just like with anything, you see the patterns and then the patterns.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to mention, at a fundamental level, do you know what PEP8 is and the term Pythonic? No. Okay.
Okay.
So at the very bottom, PEP is standards for Python, and PEP8 is the standard for naming things with uppercase letters in certain cases, and lowercase in other cases.
Yeah.
And so there's these tools that will tell you if your code conforms to PEP8. And so I would say if you're given, what was it, 500 lines of code,
Yeah.
find the PEP8 tool that will validate it for you and tell you if it's even Pythonic code to begin with, much less this other next level stuff.
Right. You can also tell your AI that it needs to be PEP8 compliant and use this tool to validate it.
Yeah.
So you can also, in most of the AI tools, like you can, it understands, well, I don't know which AI you're using, right? But a lot of AIs understand that, like, oh, there are these concepts, and if you tell it, I want you to write it this way,
Yeah.
it will write it that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it did actually, I would give it credit, it did a great job in breaking it out, like, it really looks just like this
I want to
program.
add comments.
Huh?
I want to add
I did,
comments.
yeah, I did.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where it was helpful in each kind of function, really see step by step what was what.
Right.
So then, like, the way I think is, because I'm trying to get on this same level, is thinking in the way of, like, okay, if I was going to build something out like this, how do I need to think about, like, okay, clearly there's this function, and that's going to connect to maybe, like, another function 200 lines down, I don't know. But just
Right.
remembering that process, like, I know sometimes when we're thinking about, I'm speaking for just SQL, right? It's like, okay, we're doing something pretty complex, I do it for my day, and then the next day,
Right.
get back to it, where was that? Or maybe a couple
Right.
of weeks, so I'm just trying to think about how.
Yeah, like subqueries are probably more readable, but they're not as performant, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Into your brain.
Yeah.
Swapping it in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's context, right? So like you only have, like, if you, especially like you think about AI, right? There's a limited amount of context, and just developers, there's a limited amount of context, right? Like the first like really big programming job I had was for an application. It was a PHP application, but it didn't matter what language it was, and it generated about $1 million a day in revenue, and it was a 10,000 line function. Function. A single function called generate page. So, and it had, yeah, I mean, it was a marketing site that would basically like sell loans. So it's like, oh, somebody wants a loan, go try all the different people who want to buy the loans. Right, one 10,000 line function. Now, like over time, as more people who knew better, right, were like, oh, we need to break this. We need to, like, this is, I mean, honestly, PHP 4 was just functions, right? And so PHP 5 was, oh, they have actual objects similar to Java. And so, oh, now we need to turn this into objects, but it took like 5 years. It's gigantic, and it makes $1 million a day. So you can't really screw it up. And you don't have unit tests around a 10,000 line code, so you can't have really unit tests, so you have to like break out chunks, and which is how I got into like BDD testing, just test the results on the outside, but you also couldn't really do that because you can't just sell stuff to people. Yeah, it's problematic. It's not just an interface where you're checking to see that the data changed, it's like, oh, am I selling things? So it became a whole problem, but I would say it's going to take time, right? Like, it's like, I'm a brand new junior programmer, and this is all confusing to me. Well, it's confusing to every brand new junior programmer, and it takes a while of doing it every day. There are some things you can do, like there's some things you can check online. Something that helped me out a lot, although made it worse for me in the beginning, was like books like Design Patterns or domain-driven design, as you get more and more into the stuff, there are ways that there are things that you can do when you talk about, you recognize patterns, right? Well, patterns are like, they do it that way because like the decorator pattern is a common pattern, right? Just keep at it.
I figure that's probably what the answer is, just like
Yeah. Like maybe hang out with data science folks and talk to them, because there are a lot of Python data science people, and they live their whole life, for whether they like it or not, inside of Python. Most of them like it better than R, or just random stuff that they have to have people do for ETL. So like, because those are people who are like, software development isn't my gig, but I have to use software to build my stuff. And it's all Python nowadays.
The other big tip I'd have for you is master the navigation tools that are in your IDE, so that you can jump to the definition, jump back to the callers.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Pick one and use it. Okay, what time is it? All right. AI is fine. All right, so I think we got through this, right? Because it was, like I said, this is a fairly advanced one, where it's like, oh, I need to create some state and hold on to that, and then call a context manager that has state, which, again, it took me. This is probably like a third of the total demonstration was getting this to actually work. Of writing this whole thing was just to get this one thing to work. So every time I tried it, it didn't work. And I'm like, I know there's a way to do this. And I managed to finally get it working. So nested context managers. I see people do this the wrong way. I actually had a code review the other day where this was wrong. You don't have to do like with, right? Indenting every time for the context manager, right? You can just, as long as they're all synchronous or all asynchronous context managers, you can have one statement with whatever the function as that, comma, whatever the function as something else, right? So you can just put it all on one line. So you don't have to indent so far that you don't know where you are or where you're going, because Python is all about indenting. Does that make sense? Okay. Best practices, keep enter lightweight, and ensure exit always releases resources.
The whole point, right?
Yeah. And avoid side effects and teardown. Right.
You just did a print in your teardown.
Well, no. But the exit is not teardown.
Oh.
Right, because sometimes what you end up building, right, if you weren't using this, you might in your teardown function, right, when it's getting collected by the garbage collector, you might tell it to delete something or, right, close the connection. Right, that's the other way to do it to make sure it always gets closed.
You mean underscore del.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by in teardown, right? The actual object
You're
teardown.
supposed to use del. I think that's why this was invented.
Yeah, I get right. So that's why it's not a best practice. Like avoid side effects and teardown. So use your enter and your exit. So there's also asynchronous context managers. I want to kind of bring that. They're very similar. It'll look almost identical, except the big difference is that you use async with. There's aenter and aexit. You'll see that Python, for the dunder methods, if it's asynchronous, it tends to just be the same thing as the synchronous method, prefaced by an A. And you can wait inside the enter and the exit for non-blocking code, and it can only be used inside of asynchronous functions. Or unless you call async IO run, which you wouldn't really want to do for a decorator, for a context manager. So if you made asynchronous context manager class, right? So you've got an async aenter and async aexit. You use an async with inside of an async function, and everything works fine. It's probably one of the lesser confusing changes into async. There are a lot of things in async that get really confusing, especially like how do I create an async generator? That gets like. How do I loop properly? Do I put async before, async after, or both? Do I do an async for or an await? That gets confusing for me anyway. And then there's an async context manager decorator as well. So it's the exact same thing before, except you're just decorating an async function. And then kind of a real-world async example. This I do quite a lot. When you're using any kind of async thing, it's usually have an async session, which holds your connection pool, and then you're constantly having to do other things for your gets when you're actually interacting with the endpoint itself. But this creates one that basically does all of that stuff to just return the text instead of having to go 3 levels deep inside of your async stuff. It just creates an awaitable function to do all of that. Any questions there? Yeah.
So even with the async with, you could daisy chain the 2 with statements as well, right? With the comma separated?
You daisy chain
Like, so you
async?
go
Yes.
back
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But this one requires that one, which is why it doesn't. Right? You have a session, and you need the session to make the request, so you're not having separate pieces.
Okay, so you, in this case, because you're require the...
Because they're chained. They're actually chained.
So you couldn't link...
Yeah, you couldn't link it together because you wouldn't have the object to give it.
Gotcha.
Because it's like, so the first one is AO HTTP client session, and then you have session get, which is your next one. So you have to have the object already created.
Gotcha.
I'm pretty sure there's no way to do that in any version of Python. You can't even do like the walrus or anything like that to make it happen. But if you were saying like, oh, I need an HTTP session, and I need an S3 client, and I need a file open, you could put all of those on the same line.
Okay, if any one of those fail, then it's gonna, how does that work? If anyone,
Honestly, I'm not sure how that works because in theory, you haven't entered the block yet. But I'm not 100% sure.
oh, so,
Wait, what do you mean?
So he's saying if we go back to, where is it? Nope.
Yields in the try already, is that right?
Well, but hold on. What we were talking about here, where is it?
there it is.
Oh, is that it? Yeah. So if you error here, you're not in the block. So it shouldn't go through your context
Is
manager.
that true? That you're not in the block?
That's my assumption. I'm not 100% sure, but remember,
Yeah,
for line is the block, right? This is the definition of the context manager. It hasn't gone into the block yet. So my assumption is that it would not actually, if you got an error on open out.txt, that you didn't go in the block, therefore your fin context manager knows nothing about it.
So that seems really risky then.
yeah.
Why? They're not dependent on each other. Like you don't want to have your input.
So this is not a good example of your
Why?
to explain this, but you may miss closing your, so if the open in works and then the open out
Yeah.
takes a dump for some reason, if you're not in the block, you don't get your exit for your open in.
Yeah.
Your open in doesn't get closed.
Maybe it does. Maybe I honestly have no idea. It's something you can check out. I've never had to deal with it.
You can enter sequentially somehow. You can't run them in parallel. You know,
True.
You're not going to start a new thread for that.
But this is not necessarily in the block. So like that's the thing I'm confused about. Like this really isn't in the block.
That's why this syntax is confusing to me. It's not clear what order, and when does fin become available, right? Is fin available in the second?
Yeah. And so my understanding is no. Right? It's not available. So that's a really good question. I don't have the answer to it, and we don't have time to look it up.
Well, let's assume for the moment, yeah, we don't have the time. But
My assumption is it would still exit. It would still exit, just not enter. Maybe.
so what this is implying,
That does do
line
enter.
is saying with open as fin, and it's implying that there's a width that is indented for out.txt. Is that what you're saying?
That's like in order for the spirit of what it's supposed to do, to make sure that fin closes down correctly, it would almost have to be.
Okay.
But I don't know if you could actually access fin in the second one. Maybe that's something you can't do. I honestly, I don't know. I've never thought about it. I've never like I'm just like, oh yeah, I do it this way, and I never thought about like, does this have any unintended consequences? Because I've never seen it have any unintended consequences, but it might. I don't know. The Python folks think about this really hard, so it probably does do the exit, even though you're not necessarily in the block. So I don't know. It's probably, if you go take a look at the PEP for it, it'll probably tell you exactly what happens. I bet he's looking it up right now. Oh, where are we? Okay. Yeah, so kind of like the summary of the next steps, like for sync and async, choose on basing blocking versus non-blocking. You definitely don't want to have a synchronous context manager in asynchronous code because it will block. And then, for practicing stuff, right, it's every one of the ORMs out there or the database abstraction layers has transaction-based stuff, but that's like the first place I use stuff like that. Was in database connections and using an async manager for a database connection. For further reading, there's PEP 492 for coroutines, and then the concepts of docs inside of Python. So, and again, if you're unfamiliar with PEPs are for Python something, whatever, enhancement protocol or something. Yeah, it's how you make suggestions for improvements to Python. And they go through a whole process and get voted on and get implemented sometimes.
And then referred to thereafter.
Yeah. So if you ever want to know, like, why did someone build this, you can absolutely find out, because the documentation will say this was part of PEP, whatever, and you'll have a link to it. You can see the whole discussion. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. No, I think it's a great idea. Well, what about this thing? Well, we don't care about that thing. This is fine.
Don't listen to him.
Well, it's usually not like that, but it's like people say this is bad because of X. All right, and like, well, we're not worried about X because of Y. All right, so it's kind of like, oh, if you look at the free-threaded version of Python, like this is going to cause all kinds of problems. Well, you can decide if you want to use it or not. So if it causes problems, it's your problem. But they're interesting stuff. All right. Any more questions about that kind of stuff? I think we went pretty deep into it. I honestly didn't think this would go the whole time, but everybody had a lot of really good questions. So.
We actually have 15 more minutes.
Well, we have 7, right? 2:15?
2:30.
I thought it was 2:15.
Okay, we'll go by yours.
Okay. Either way. So, if this is your first time here, or you just were at Tech Alley and decided to show up, right? This is we have a Meetup page that you can find. We're here for every Tech Alley, but we have a Meetup page where you can sign up, and it'll alert you when we're going to meet, what the topic's going to be, because on Tech Alley they don't really publish that. And so you can find out what the presentation is going to be. I verified these are just regular. If you don't like to do arbitrary QR codes, there's the link. Or you can just search for VegasPy, meetup.com. There's only one. It's been here for a long time. We have a Discord that you can join. I saw a lot of people join last time, but nobody talks to anybody. I guess I'm just as guilty as anyone else of just not like being super conversational. But if you have questions about Python, there are people that you may not get an answer immediately. It just kind of depends. As part of work, I'm always on Discord because that's our communication platform. Expired? I just went to it today. What if you just put in the actual... Is it the wrong QR code? I can generate a new QR code if that's a problem. Or I can probably go find... I don't know. I'll go find the link and go make it not expired anymore. I may have to just generate a new one every time. So if you want to find out the Discord thing, because I actually went and copied this from the share thing, so that's probably still valid. Maybe the QR code's wrong. I don't know. I tried to make it easy, and apparently I just made it really, really hard. So yeah, if you want that, and again, I can generate a new one, and let you check it out later if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah, the link totally works.
Okay, so it's just a bad QR code?
I just joined.
Okay. So yeah, the link is discord.gg, capital F, capital G, 64, lowercase v. Actually, I can hear, hold on. Let's do this. I will delete that, and I'll just make this really big. There we go.
Oh yeah, that works, yeah.
Okay, there you go. And now I know I have to make a new one every month. I just used the one I had from last time. So the other thing, and I'll wait for people because I see people look at their phones trying to type that in.
Yeah.
The other thing is coming up. I won't be here next month because I will be at PyCon/FlaskCon. We're having, as part of the incubator program, PyCon is letting us have a little Flask conference. It's like half a day on the first day of presentations for PyCon. It's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Beautiful Pittsburgh. It's really nice. It's like the convention center is right on the water. They got an area up top where you can just kind of like go hang out in the sun, or it's got covered stuff like right on the river. It's actually quite nice.
They got a nice airport too.
What's that?
They have a nice airport there.
I go to a lot of airports, and I'm just like, it's okay. Pittsburgh's okay. So has everybody got that? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the U.S. version of PyCon is May 14th to 22nd. The first week is summits. So if you're a maintainer of a Python project, I'm assuming most of us probably aren't. They have like maintainer summit, and they have an educator summit. They have all these summits the first week. The second week is, or part of it anyway, right? So Friday, Saturday, Sunday is the actual conference where they have standard presentations. And then the last week is sprints, where you can go and work on one of the larger, some of them actually have some small ones that show up, but they tend to be some of the larger projects for, larger groups for open source projects for Python. So like I'll be there for 3 days of that week, helping people get working on palettes projects, which is like Flask and Click, Jinja, Verkzoid, and all the many others. Strangely enough, what we get the most during this time, because it's a lot of people from around the world come to the US PyCon, so we get a lot of translations work done. Like last year we had our first, we had some translation into Korean, we had more work on Chinese, so that was a lot of work got done on the Arabic version of the documents. So that was actually kind of cool. So if it's something that you may think you want to go to, I know that a few people here have been. Also, I don't know how useful it is, but they also have a job fair on a Sunday. I know it didn't work, like it didn't help Jay any, but as going there as an employer, we found employees, and actually I still work with one of them to this day, third company later, that we met at PyCon. So yeah, if you can't go this year, next year it's going to be in California, so it's a little closer. I can't remember where in California, but it's in California. Do you know where in California? No? But close. And supposedly we're going to have an actual FlaskCon in 2026. But yeah, it's gigantic, it's huge, it's massive. I learn a lot because there are people that give talks on things that are nothing I was particularly interested in, but it's useful for me. Like last year was a lot of the stuff about free threading and what that means and how that's good or bad for your applications. If you're unfamiliar, free threading, like there's this wonderful and terrible thing known as the global interpreter lock in Python, that if you're running Python code, that it will just block everything else, no matter how many threads you start. And spoiler alert, if you use the built-in regular expression parser, it will block. That was a fix we had to do recently on the project I'm working on, is that we had to use a different regular expression that was not part of the CPython code, so it didn't block the GIL, because it would just block processing of everything else. And it was on an async server, so.
I think it's a regular expression.
Well, it's reading through a gigantic document, so it's parsing an insurance. Well, the problem was it had like one particular document had a problem. It's got a look ahead, and so it got into an infinite look ahead, and it doesn't recognize the infinite look ahead, where the new library does notice the infinite look ahead. And so if you write a complex enough regular expression, just to know, like I knew about this because it was actually a big problem in Node for a long time, is that if you parse any regular expression, it can lock up your entire server. Like that's a way that people can do denial of service attacks on Node servers. And honestly, any asynchronous server, if you provide something that will just, that you can put it into some infinite loop or just let it process for 3 or 4 seconds, it will lock up the entire server.
So you're letting users enter regular expressions?
No. But I mean, in Node, so validation happens sometimes in regular expressions, oftentimes, or even routes, right? Routes are processed via regular expression.
You control. Just don't write a bad one.
Right, but you're getting user data put in. So the whole thing is like verify your data, validate your data before, like make sure it's not too big before you. Because a lot of people in regular expressions, what they were doing is they would do a validation, right? And part of the validation is that it's so long. No, validate length first, and then pass it to your regular expression, so you don't get a 2 megabyte piece of text that you're going to have to parse with your regular expression parser that may have problems. All right, so it's like normally it doesn't happen, but if someone attacks you and just starts giving you a bunch of data into your form fields for however long you'll allow, they can cause problems. And so we had like, well, we're threading and we're telling the thread to fail after a second, and we should be okay on this. No, the GIL. I didn't expect regular expression to be a block in the GIL.
You have to do a fork for your regular expression.
But you can't really, like we couldn't do the fork. Like forking wouldn't work.
And you'd be DOSing yourself.
Yeah. So like that was the first thing I tried, but the problem is it actually worked. The problem is that when it fails, it's difficult to debug. Like when you have a problem, like it worked, it worked, but developing using multi-process is difficult to debug when there's a problem. So I'll be like, oh yeah, cool, now I'm going to start a new process, and here's the thing you need to evaluate. And like it did that just fine, right? But then like as I'm writing the code, there was a bug and it didn't work on one particular case, and I'm like, I have no idea what it's doing. I have no idea why it's failing. I have a step-through debugger that's allowing me to go to the other process, but it never goes there. I don't know what happened. Like it's just not working, and I don't know why. So, because I didn't want to move to some arbitrary other regular expression library. But then I found that half of the stuff inside of the code that I use, the libraries that I use, also use this other regular expression library. So that solved our problem because it wasn't using CPython. I don't know where we're going with that.
I want to thank you because I think you just solved the problem I was having. In Sublime Text,
Yeah.
I have content or the color coding syntax highlighter,
Right.
and it's been hanging on me, and I don't know why. And I think it might be because the regular expressions that are checking for the syntax might be blocking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, because that's based on Node, Sublime? Is it a Node app? Or is it just asynchronous?
No, it's in Python.
Is it?
Sublime Text is written in
Huh.
Python.
No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess it doesn't matter if it's threaded or asynchronous, it's still the same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the threads get blocked.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I've got a ton of plugins custom plugins that I've written for Sublime. And they're all Python.
Yeah, so there's the other tool actually it's basically a drop-in replacement for, you can drop it in for the standard regex, for the RE library.
Uh-huh.
Or it has other stuff that you can do, but it's the one thing that it has is it doesn't block. So that's nice.
Well, I don't have control over the syntax processor. I have just control over my syntax
Okay.
language. So I just need to, but now I know, you give me a clue where to look, that it's probably
Yeah. Cool.
one of
Maybe.
the
You never know.
All your
So the
plugins.
T version of the Python 3.13, does that fix all that issue?
Yeah.
Well, so free-threaded would fix that, but it would cause other problems. Right? I don't know if, because again, to use free-threaded, your code has to be thread safe. And I don't know if my code can be free-threaded, right? There's problems. So again, it might solve it, but 3.13 has other problems. It's still a little early for us to take it on. It's probably okay, but there's like that, it's only been around it's only in its 3rd patch. And I'm still left over from the horrible Microsoft days where like 3rd patch, or Oracle, like 3rd patch, that's not even for developers. So we'll move to 3.13 at some point, but free threading, we'll have to see. Like for us, it was just like, oh, here's this other library, fix it. And then at the end, because we are running to the end, is suggestions for next month's meeting topic.
So I have a request.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking to get into doing PWAs, progressive web
Web
apps.
apps, yeah.
And I'm looking at using Django. And I was wondering if anybody here has done any of that. Either Django, just Django, or Django with PWAs, or Flask with PWAs.
Nah, our Django guy moved.
What?
Yeah. You know Django, you said?
I've used Django.
But for progressive web apps? Nah. I mean, you could learn about it, then tell us. maybe June.
What about Mojo? Modulars Mojo? You know about that?
No.
It's a compiled language that has this very Python-like syntax.
It's isn't Mojo a superset of Python? That's what their goal is.
That's their goal.
Oh, okay. So it's good. It's like hip hop for PHP.
But this is legit. This is the guy who did the guy who started the company also did LLVM, which is
Right.
obviously he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, 'cause it's something that, like in the PHP world, there was hip hop, which was a superset of, like, it would compile PHP code.
But that's JIT. This will compile to a binary.
Okay, so yeah, well, my recollection is that you could compile if you.
You can't really compile PHP to a binary because it has to live the process, right? You can maybe
Well, no, it would take PHP code and compile it. That was the whole thing. Like it was.
MOJO?
Yeah, it was a PHP thing.
modular.
Yeah.
Modular?
Yeah, and coming soon, you'll be able to go pip install modular, and then you'll be able to accelerate your Python code with modular plugins. So instead of using Cython or
Rust.
IO3,
We're building it in Rust and making a plugin.
C, and wanting to shoot yourself in the head.
Yeah. So, do you want to give that presentation?
Yeah, but not next month.
Okay. So another thing that we had that was a possibility is that Jay had offered to give something. There's a tool out there. I can't remember the name of it, but
Schema thesis.
what's that?
Schema.
Schema thesis. So basically, you can take an open API compliant API that has the Open API JSON or what's the other one? Swagger JSON, and it will automatically generate like integration tests.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we'll do that one, and then maybe the following month we'll learn about Mojo.
If there's any interest, I've been doing a lot of controlling LibreOffice Writer with Python. I can
Interesting.
talk about that if anybody's interested.
That'd be an interesting one. Unfortunately, I do a lot of stuff with Word. So I have to modify Word documents using Python, which is less fun than you might think.
Yeah, I started out doing that, and then I got tired of paying for the Microsoft Office, so switched to LibreOffice, and it was a harder switch than I expected, but I was really looking forward to getting off of VBA anyway.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we write letters for insurance companies, so it has to be in Word. Because we actually get templates from them and then fill in stuff on the templates.
right.
So it's actually like modifying a Word doc using Mustache templates. Use the Mustache templating system to modify Word docs.
Okay.
Harder than you would think. Really hard.
I can think.
Oh yeah, because it's like, here's this thing, but here's this section that has this format, and this section has another format, and how do you, like writing a parser for a text file is so much easier than a document.
So my tool chain is ASCII doc, and then Python code that mucks with the XML, and then I run that, import that into a pandoc into
Right.
LibreOffice, and then I do lots of stuff inside LibreOffice.
Well, that would be an interesting one. We'll have to set it up for one of the months coming up.
Okay.
All right, so next month we'll have Jay. You're going to be here, right, Jay? Right, Jay? All right. Because I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be able to call you. I'll be in Pennsylvania. All right. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.